In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about cells, which are the very basis of life. And this is intended for those of you who have not taken biology and have no idea what a cell is, or if it's been a long time and you'd like a review. Even if you know what a cell is, I'll be covering important things that relate to this course. So for each of my recorded lectures, I have a learning objective. So what do I mean by a learning objective? It's what I want you to get from the recorded lecture, what I want you to get from the video. And I will be assessing you, or testing you is another way of putting it, on how well you've met these learning objectives. Now, at the first part of the syllabus, we have all of the learning objectives for the course laid out, so you know what you're getting into. This video, the learning objective is that you will explore a wide range of microbes that make the human body home, including beneficial and pathogenic microbes. Well, to be able to fully understand that, you need to know what a cell is, which is why I'm doing this recorded lecture. Here are the topics that we're going to be covering in this video. I'm going to talk about the unseen world. I'm going to introduce you to cells. We're going to talk about the cell parts that are important to understand for this course, and then I have a summary. So let's talk about the unseen world. For most of us, don't you love my cute little drawing of a human? We are aware of things that are approximately the same size as us. We can see other people. We can see big things like trees. We can see relatively small things like onions and teeny tiny things like worms, but we are unable to see cells. So how do we even know they exist? Well, a scientist by the name of Robert Hooke had access to a microscope, which makes small things bigger so we can see them. And he looked at some cork or bark from a tree, and he saw what to him looked like the rooms in a monastery that are called cells that monks live in. So he called these square things and kind of round things cells, and we continue to use this term even now. All of us are composed of cells. Everything that's living is composed of cells. So let's talk about what a cell is. So cells are the smallest microorganisms or organisms that are alive. So what do we mean by organisms that are alive? To be considered alive, you have to do these 5 things. You have to take food or energy from the environment to keep yourself going. You have to regulate yourself. So in other words, taking a human cell as an example, my human cell is, say a cheek cell, is alive because it's taking food in, usually from the circulatory system, and it's keeping itself intact. It's using that food to build more parts, all of that good thing. We call this homeostasis. In other words, maintaining a balance within itself. Cells also reproduce. Even my cheek cells reproduce because I'm constantly shedding my cheek cells, so I have to keep making more of them. Also, as a multicellular organism, as a human, I can reproduce, I can have kids. As an individual, cells respond to the environment. So, suppose there's a lack of a certain kind of food. Suppose an organism has been living on a simple sugar and that sugar's gone, so it responds by changing to eating, say, complex starches. And we'll be talking about that a lot in this course. Also, as a population, living organisms respond to their environment. They change over time. This becomes really important when we talk about the rise of antibiotic-resistant pathogens within the that we are exposed to as humans. By the way, this ability to respond to the environment as a population is called evolution, change in a population over time. Now, to be a cell, you have to have all the parts of a cell. In this class, we're going to be talking about viruses. Viruses are not considered alive because they don't have all of the essential parts of a cell. And we'll get into that later in week 3. Now, some organisms are multicellular. Humans are multicellular. I am composed of trillions of cells, and they all combine to make me. Trees are multicellular. Onions and worms are multicellular. But an awful lot of what we're going to be talking about in this class are single cells. These are cells that can do everything that they need to do all by themselves. If you take my cheek cell, individual cheek cell, and slap it on a counter, it's not going to live very long because it's part of a multicellular organism. If you take the bacteria from my cheek cell, slap it on the counter, they won't be terribly happy, but they'll sit around and live until they get in another mouth. Kind of a gross thought, but we'll be talking more about that as the course goes on. Now, both single cells and multicellular organisms live in communities. So think of it this way. Unless I am a mountain man and I'm living up in the mountains by myself and I'm chopping my own wood and building my own house and growing my own food and hunting and that kind of thing, that would be somebody who's not living in a community. Most of us live in a community. I'm an instructor at CWI, you're a student, we all have jobs, we contribute to the community, and we all work together. Well, the single cells in your gut, we'll use that as an example, also live in a community. There's some that teach others what they need to know to live in your gut. There are some that produce food for the others. There are some that do all sorts of other jobs, and they all work together in a community in your gut. Now, this community in your gut is also a community with you. They talk to you, believe it or not. And we will be exploring that as we go through the semester. Now, let's talk about cell parts. I'm not going to cover all the parts of the cells. This is a very basic introduction. I'm going to talk about the cell parts that are going to be important later on in this semester. So first, let's talk about the cell membrane. To be a cell, you have to have a cell membrane. This is kind of an oily, lipidy covering that keeps the outside stuff out and the inside stuff in. All cells have a cell membrane. Viruses do not have a cell membrane. That's why they got kicked out of the living club. Now, some cells have a wall outside of their cell membrane, and we call it the cell wall. It helps reinforce the cell and keep the inside stuff in and the outside stuff out. Think of the Great Wall of China. It was built in ancient China to keep the bad guys out and to protect what's on the inside. Not all cells have a cell wall. Your cells, human cells, animal cells, do not have a cell wall. This becomes important when we talk about antibiotics. Also, the organisms that do have cell walls have different kinds of things that are in the cell wall. For example, bacteria have a molecule called peptidoglycan. There are antibiotics that specifically attack peptidoglycan, and they leave our cells alone because, one, we don't have a cell wall, and two, if we did have one, we wouldn't make it out of peptidoglycan. Eukaryotes, yeast, also have a cell wall, but they don't make it out of peptidoglycan, so the antibiotics that attack peptidoglycan would not be effective against them. Enough about cell walls. Let's move on to DNA. All cells have DNA, and I've got a later video talking about what DNA is. In prokaryotic cells, bacterial cells, that's the main group of prokaryotes we're going to be talking about, their DNA is just kind of inside the cell. We cannot, when we look under the microscope, see anything enclosing it. Eukaryotic cells, like you, humans, animals, fungi, including yeast, have a membrane covering around the DNA, and we call that a nucleus. So we divide cells into two major groups: prokaryotes that don't have a nucleus and eukaryotes that do have a nucleus. And we've done this because we can see the nucleus under the microscope. Makes an easy division. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about that all cells have are ribosomes. Ribosomes are, you can think of them as little machines that make proteins. And proteins compose just about everything in the cell. So, ribosomes are essential. If you don't have ribosomes, you're not a cell. We also have antibiotics that attack the different kinds of ribosomes. Ribosomes in prokaryotic cells are different than those in eukaryotic cells. And we take advantage of that with our drugs to control microbes. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at an actual picture of the two different kinds of cells. So this is a microscope picture, also called a micrograph, of human cheek cells. And we've also got some bacteria. So if you look, here's the cell membrane. There's kind of a fold here. Cheek cells are kind of flat. And if you look, see, there's the nucleus. Ribosomes are too small to see. If we had a microscope that could enlarge things even bigger, we would be able to see the ribosomes. Now, if you look up here, these little guys are prokaryotic cells. They're a whole lot smaller. See, we've got some here, we got some here. And even if we were to zoom in, we would not see a nucleus, but we would see ribosomes. Well, that's it for this recorded lecture, but before I go, let's go ahead and summarize what we learned in this recorded lecture. Cells are the smallest organisms that are alive. I probably should have dropped the microorganism, but viruses are considered microorganisms, but they're not alive. You are composed of many cells working together. That makes you multicellular. Most of Earth's organisms are single cells. That will become more apparent as we discuss the microbiome. And most of Earth's organisms live in communities. And all cells have a cell membrane, DNA, and ribosomes. And here are the references for the pictures I pulled off the internet. Let me know if you have any questions about this.